And now also recording.
Oh, okay, because I was going to.
We're live on Facebook, and we'll also have a video playlist on YouTube later.
Oh, so you're recording it. I don't need to then, yeah?
Yeah.
Okay, good. Fantastic. Okay, so bodhicitta is the point. Compassion wing. There's the two wings of the bird. I love this analogy. I repeat it constantly because it actually contains the entire path from A to Z. You know, it's amazing. It's really very, very delicious. And all the teachings fit into these two wings, and it's so important to understand the character of the different teachings so that we can understand how they are progressive, and that's often surprising for us. So as His Holiness the Dalai Lama says, I mean, no, I'm saying bodhicitta is the point, the compassion wing is the point, but as His Holiness says, compassion is not enough. You've got to have wisdom, baby. He doesn't say baby, you've got to have wisdom. So that's what sounds puzzling. What do you mean wisdom? It sounds kind of holy, you know? So we're going to discuss that because that's the basis. In other words, compassion is this powerful wish to benefit others, but that does not give you the ability to benefit others. It's just like, you know, so obvious, but we've got to think of it like this. You know, if you're trying to be a healer, a doctor, you can have enormous compassion, but what good does that do you when you walk in and you burst into tears, but you've got no wisdom, you don't know how to help people? So the wisdom wing gives you the ability to know how to help. And that's what's powerful. And what it does is gives power and strength and iron to the compassion, you know, because I mean, I think the way we think of compassion now is very sentimental, very limited. I mean, in fact, profoundly limited if we compare with the Buddhist view of what really compassion is, what we have to talk about. It's so limited, you know, and it's very sentimental because it's based on attachment half the time. This is what's difficult for us. So we're going to unpack all this. And so to unpack and to understand this bodhicitta, to understand how we get it, to understand love and compassion, which are the basis, we've got to understand the wisdom wing. You just don't have a choice because it's, you know, it's a bit like, and this is why it's so important to remember the stages. I mean, they talk about the stages of the path. We know this word well, lam rim, you know. But I mean, I'd rather call it a course. And if you use the word course, like if you see in your course notes, you know, it's just a teaching I gave a few years ago on the whole lam rim. And I always refer to these different levels of it. And it's kind of cliched: junior school, high school, university, and postgraduate. Instead of, as Lama Zopa would politely put it, this lam rim is divided into the teachings and practices, first of all, for the disciple of the least capability. I mean, that's a mouthful, isn't it? I'm happy to say it. Rinpoche respecting the lineage, the teachings and practices suitable to the disciple of the least capability. And then you've got the teachings and practices suitable to the disciple of the middle capability. And then you've got the greatest capability, which is the Mahayana path. And then you've got Tantra. So why not call it junior school, high school, university, postgraduate? It works, actually. And I think it's so interesting because we don't think of a spiritual path as gradual. We know very well if it's math or music or whatever, you've got to go first junior school, then go to the next advanced stuff. But we tend not to think of spiritual paths like that. And so if we listen to the teachings on karma, then we listen to emptiness, then we listen to compassion, we'd always think, emptiness is the most advanced. But compassion actually is more advanced. The emptiness teachings, although they're taught in the context of the Bodhisattva path, in the Gelugpa tradition, in the Tibetan tradition, they're actually in their character, they're a high school teaching. Emptiness is a high school teaching. Compassion is a university teaching. This is very interesting. Who would have thought that, you know? I mean, often the starting point for most of us to get into this path is compassion. So we need to understand the level of compassion, first theoretically, you know, and then know the techniques, which we'll discuss, the techniques of how to accomplish it. So the more advanced levels of compassion, which are they lead to bodhicitta. You know, as Pabonka Rinpoche says, you've got to be a suitable vessel. The more advanced levels are outrageous, you know. I mean, they're outrageous, really. And you've got to be a suitable vessel. So a suitable vessel to go to university physics is obviously a person who studied junior school and high school and all the rest, you know. It's kind of clear. So it's so important to understand this, that the practices are gradual. This is what lam rim means. And we know if you say a course is gradual. It's early stuff, middle stuff, advanced stuff. So it's so important to understand this. Okay, so bodhicitta. I mean, most of the words we translate in English and use and that's great. But this one, for some reason, we seem to stick to the Sanskrit. You know, bodhicitta. So if you translate, it sounds a bit meaningless. You've got to understand the meaning. It literally means bodhi. Well, bodhi, I think, is coming from Buddha. A bodhisattva I don't know Sanskrit, obviously, but bodhisattva is an awakening person. Bodhicitta is the awakening mind. I mean, how boring. What does that mean? You know, it's so a person who has got this bodhicitta, who has accomplished this level of realizations, is a person on the way to becoming a Buddha, you know, and there are 10 stages. Once you've realized emptiness on the bodhisattva path, once you realize emptiness and you become an Arya bodhisattva, what they call an Arya bodhisattva, a person who's a superior being who's realized emptiness, then there are 10 stages, 10 bhumis, grounds or levels, and they lay out the 10 stages that you have to go through to finally accomplish Buddhahood, you know. So the word Buddha is so interesting. It tells us the whole thing. In fact, it almost seems too simple, but it's marvelous. The etymology of the word Buddha is so delicious, you know. Bud implies the utter eradication from our mind of all neuroses, all ego, all delusions, all fears, all dramas, all the misery, the stuff that we're so familiar with. So before we even get to the meaning of da, already this is completely insane. You ask you go to some therapist or some neuroscientist and ask them please to map out on the brain how you can get rid of anger, jealousy, depression, and anxiety forever. Well, they'll say, well, I'm sorry, we tried that, Robina, in the 1930s. We called it a lobotomy and it didn't work, honey. So we have no method like this. Certainly in neuroscience. And I think in our psychological models, there's no method, there's no view. There's no view that you can rid the mind utterly and completely of ego and fears and jealousy and resentment. It sounds nonsense. In fact, sounds like mental illness, you know? So we've got to hear what Buddha's saying here. And because we're so caught up naturally, the view that prevails in the world these days, that's given the most serious attention, is the view of science, the view of neuroscience, the modern psychological views. They're the serious ones. You know, as soon as we say religion, we don't take it seriously. But we've got to remember that Buddha is a brilliant, genius psychologist. The mind is his expertise. Do not think otherwise. I mean, His Holiness, I quote him often. He said one time, I'm just paraphrasing, you know, with these amazing Indians more than 3,000 years ago, who are the ones who began the investigation into the nature of self. That's incredible. They're the ones who came up with this brilliant psychological skill called single-pointed concentration, shamatha, calm abiding, this ingenious technique, the likes of which is not existing in our culture. And it's only really now in the modern world we're beginning to discover these all and discover these amazing Indian views, giving them serious attention, not just hearing it as wacko religion. I mean, it's marvelous. And much of this is because of His Holiness the Dalai Lama, his amazing presence the last 30, 40 years, all these conversations he's having, you know, with all the greatest thinkers and scientists in the modern world. And they're really now seriously looking into these amazing views that have been around for 3,000 plus years. So as we know, Buddha came out of that amazing tradition. But until now, we've known nothing about it. We paid no attention. We track ourselves back to the Greeks, don't we? In fact, I noticed every time we have a fancy word, we put it into Greek. Or every time it's a mental illness, it's Greek. Neurosis, psychosis, neurotic. I mean, schizophrenic. We love Greek words. As soon as every flower is in Greek, or maybe it's in Latin, I don't know. It's very curious. Anyway, the mind is Buddha's expertise, okay? That's it. So the first syllable of the word Buddha, which is the end result of all this hard work, the end result of this path, implies the eradication from your mind of all neuroses. I mean, that is so shocking, but kind of encouraging. You mean I can get rid of anger completely, jealousy, delusions, neurosis, fear? Yep, Buddha says. How come, Buddha? Well, I've done it myself. Here are my methods. This is not from revelation. I always quote this, always. A man I met in New Zealand at a teaching, he happened to be a scientist in New Zealand, in Nelson, years ago. He asked me this question, and it's the first time anybody has asked this question. I've never heard it since. It's very marvelous. He said, who revealed the teachings to the Buddha? It's a brilliant teaching. It's a brilliant question, because immediately he wanted to know the source from even beyond the Buddha, you know? And he was shocked, and people laughed when I said, well, would you ask Einstein, who revealed the teachings about relativity to him? And this is a really crucial point to get, you know? Because as soon as we say religion, and indeed Buddhism is religious philosophy, of course it is. What else is it? As soon as we say religion, we lose the plot. We assume a creator. We assume it's from on high. We assume it's revelation. We assume you can't prove it. These are the assumptions we have very deep. Well, you better get rid of all them if you want to understand Buddhism. There's no view like that in Buddhism. If Buddha would say, if your mind finally can't cognize something, then it doesn't exist. It's axiomatic for the Buddha that that which exists is that which can be cognized by mind. This is kind of stunning. It's very delicious, you know. So Buddha is saying, I have done this job. I have removed from my mind all neuroses. And second syllable, da, what he's also done on the Mahayana path, he has developed to perfection everything else in the mind: love, compassion, wisdom, kindness. And the bonus is joy and bliss. These are our true nature. These are our true nature as far as Buddha is concerned, conventionally speaking. So it's a pretty amazing concept to think this way, you know, and it should give us great courage. You mean anger and jealousy and depression are not intrinsic to my being? That's right, Buddha says. They're adventitious. Therefore, they can be removed. And so the entirety of the Buddhist path from A to Z is implied by this word. The methodology is right there implied by this word. Think about it. It's kind of tasty. It's not just believing in something. Faith is a necessary quality. Like you go to a decent doctor, you better have faith in their qualities, otherwise you won't go. But it's not based on idiocy. You don't go to a doctor because they look cute. You don't like Buddha because he smiles, you know. You've checked on him, checked up on his views, checked up on his words, checked up on his methods. Any person with half a brain would do that in the modern world. Well, that's the Buddha's view. So it's not revelation. There is revelation in Buddhism. In the more advanced teachings, the Mahayana teachings, and even certainly the Tantric teachings, were given at the level of more subtle level of the Buddha, not just in the human form. So you could argue that's revelation, but not in the way we think, you know. Everything in Buddhism is necessarily something you can cognize and finally prove for yourself. If you can't, chuck it out. It doesn't exist, okay? As His Holiness the Dalai Lama says to us Westerners, you know, if you're practicing Buddhism, you're taking, and this is my words, you're basically taking Buddha's methodology. And what's his methodology? Is the methodology he used to develop his own potential. And basically you go along, you're ticking the boxes, you're proving it to be true each step of the way, just like any body of knowledge. But if you get to a certain point where you can prove Buddha's wrong, well, of course you say, thank you, Buddha, goodbye. And that's exactly what he did with the Hindus. He went as far as he could go, and he knew there was further to go. So he diverged in his own direction, you know. So Buddha is the end result. It's the culmination of it's the two wings, the completion of the wisdom wing, which is Bud, and the completion of the compassion wing, which is Da. Putting it simply like this, it kind of makes it kind of a bit sort of manageable, because it's not, when you start to realize like in the Tibetan Buddhist monastic university system, which is, as His Holiness always points out to us, is coming from the great Nalanda tradition, this amazing monastic university in India, 5th through 11th century or something. As he says, we are the Nalanda tradition. As Buddhism began to decline in India, it just transferred itself straight over to Tibet, and it hasn't given up since, you know. And here the Lama's trying to continue to keep it going in India, because, you know, it's all dead in Tibet. Who knows what'll happen? And indeed, it's filtering into the West, you know, us crazy modern people. So, okay. So, okay, what's bodhicitta mean? Okay, bodhicitta, awakening thought. It's got two qualities. When you've got this bodhicitta, when you've become a bodhisattva, when you've achieved that level of realization, when you, you know, when you get that label, it's when you've got firmly, when you've made this paradigm shift in your mind, and it's stable, not just a moment of it, you've achieved it by practicing. There are two main qualities. First point is only others. You've done this incredible, this paradigm shift, like I've said, this exchange, you've totally exchanged, the way they call it, self for others. Now, this already is too much for the human mind. That means only others arise in your mind. There's no longer the thought of I. So in the conventional sense, you say the word I, you're not stupid. You know, it means a person. When you say I, you know, it means you. But the usual way that I runs the show, as far as we're concerned, you know, the main player in our head is I, isn't it? That doesn't exist like that for them. There's only the thought of others. This is too much. Even just that thought is like, excuse me, you mean that's possible? And as one woman in the course said, well, that sounds like mental illness to me. And that's because our views, our assumptions of what is possible in our own mind, and indeed in our psychology, because who creates psychology in our world? People like you and me. So we can only go as far as we can all imagine, you know. But this is the Buddha's view, the Mahayana view. So you made this paradigm shift. And so the first quality you have is that others are the only ones you think about. Like you're, in other words, basically you're like a mother and the entire universe are your children. That's it. So, you know, and you have this natural, spontaneous, automatic attitude that whoever's in front of you, whatever sentient beings there are, they're your job. They're your responsibility, you know, to take care of them, to do whatever needs to be done based on the wisdom to know how, which you've got in junior school and high school, and which you continue to grow as you progress on the path. The second quality of a bodhisattva is the long-term goal, because your goal is to become a Buddha, mean to be fully qualified. Your goal is to become fully qualified, perfected wisdom and perfected qualities to enable you to know exactly how to benefit every being and have the power to do so. So your goal, as much as possible, as quickly as possible, no matter how many lifetimes it takes, your long-term goal is, I must become a Buddha. So you never give up. You never give up. You never give up. So that's the culmination of this, of a series of techniques that might take many lifetimes, might take many years, depending on the person, how hard you practice, of techniques techniques that culminate, the techniques. There's two main like techniques that culminate in bodhicitta. They're both techniques to help us develop love, compassion, and then stages on the way to that. So then one is called the 6 causes and 1 effect, and the other is called exchanging. Well, it's called, there's different terms. It's the one of exchanging self for others, a more radical series of practices that are beloved by all the Tibetan practitioners, exchanging self for others, they call it. Or lojong, that's known as lojong, which just means mind transformation, which seems a bit abstract. That's how they call it. So we're going to be talking about those, but we're going to inevitably be having to go back, and we're going to go back and forth to the compassion, the wisdom wing, because unless we understand what goes on there, we're not going to understand this level of compassion. It's not possible. It's just not possible. So what is compassion then, if that's the case? If bodhicitta is the result of infinite love and infinite compassion, this is the essence of all the virtues. In fact, they bring it all down to compassion. We better know what compassion is. What is compassion? Okay. Definition in Buddhism, it's a thought. It's always, everything starts with a thought. And then of course it's grown. A thought, you see someone suffering and it's, oh my God, look at that suffering. May you not suffer. You could say that's compassion. So I think in modern psychology, there's different uses of the words empathy, compassion. They have different definitions, but as far as Buddhism is concerned, they're the same. You see someone suffering, your heart goes out. My God, I wish they did not suffer. That's compassion. So then you've got love as well. And what's that? Love is a thought. When you see someone happy, you delight in their happiness, and then may you be happy, or you want them to be happy. So wanting a person not to suffer, that's compassion. Wanting a person to be happy, that's love, essentially. And there's levels of this, unbelievable, insane levels of this that we can learn to accomplish that eventually culminate in bodhicitta. Bodhicitta is not equivalent of compassion, not an equivalent at all. It's the culmination, the result of unbelievable levels of outrageous love and compassion. Now, the other thing, we're going to go all through all these things. The other thing that's crucial about this word compassion, there's a very specific type of compassion that's unique to the Bodhisattva path. And that's called great compassion, or sometimes Lama Zopa, I get a bit confused whether that's another level, but I think it's the same. They call it the special attitude. But great compassion, it's a technical term, Mahakaruna in Sanskrit. So compassion is, oh my God, look at that suffering. But great compassion is, what can I do to help? What can I do to fix it? It's this, Dalai Lama used to call it universal responsibility. It's this powerful attitude. It's like a mother. A mother's a perfect example, or a father. You see your child drowning. You're going to have unbelievable compassion. Oh my God, I can't believe it. But you're not looking around wondering who's going to save the baby. You're with him, even if you can't swim, you're in that water, honey. I remember watching television years ago, some documentary about the outrageous things that mothers would do to save their babies, to save their children. Like one woman lifted a car. One woman ran into a burning house because there's only the thought of the child. Okay, they're regular people. They've got attachment. But that's the type of, that's exactly the way a bodhisattva would be, because they finish the job, you see. That's why the wisdom wing is so crucial. In the wisdom wing, you got to start with yourself. There's no choice. You got to start with Buddha's. Okay. The Four Noble Truths is Buddha's fundamental first teaching. It's the first teaching he gave. It's in reference to suffering. First, there is suffering. Second, there are causes. Third, you can get rid of them, both suffering and its causes. And four, how to do it. It's pretty, it's pretty marvelous. So who do you think Buddha's talking to in the first level of practice when he talks about there is suffering? Often one of the commonest things I find in teachings, people that ask questions and they're all thinking, as they're listening to the teachings about delusions and suffering, they're thinking, I wish my husband was here. I wish my mother was here. I wish my sister was here. Or they really need this. But who do you think Buddha's talking to, honey? You. So the wisdom wing is all about you. It's got nothing to do with other sentient beings yet. In fact, the wisdom wing is back off and leave sentient beings alone, please. Mind your own damn business and start to work on yourself. But we don't hear that part. We don't hear that at all. We don't recognize this. And this is why it's so powerfully necessary to understand the levels of teachings. So the wisdom wing is the first and second scopes of the Lam Rim, junior school and high school. The first level of teachings, given the Four Noble Truths. Okay, in the Four Noble Truths, Buddha says, one, there is suffering. And this is the point now. Okay, sorry, this is the point. Go back to the compassion. Compassion is empathy with the suffering of another. Well, excuse me, sir, what's compassion? Sorry, what's suffering? So in order to understand this bodhicitta, you've got to understand what compassion is, and then you've got to understand suffering. So how do you learn that? You've got to go back to high school and you do the Four Noble Truths. So what is suffering? Well, there are three levels as far as Buddha is concerned. Three levels of suffering. And you can either, the bigger picture for the Buddha, the bigger picture is the whole universe. You know, Buddha's got this view, as we know, of various realms of existence. So you've got the entire existence of the universe. You've got the three realms. This is coming from the Buddha, from the Hindus as well. You've got there are certain beings that are called the formless beings. They're the ones who've gone to the peak of samsara, to the tip of samsara. And they, as far as they're concerned, that's liberation. They've gone to this deepest absorption in their mind. They don't even have gross aggregates, you know. Then you've got the slightly grosser dudes, and they're the form realm. And they're both just sitting in this deepest absorption. And as far as they're concerned, that's the goal. Now you've got the desire realm, and then we're in that one, and there are 6 suburbs in that one. So then all the suburbs are in terms of on the spectrum from an incredible joy to the most intense suffering. And they're all, as far as Buddha's concerned, they're all suffering. His view of suffering is quite subtle. So you've got the God realms, a couple of those, and that's a bit like heaven or paradise. Buddha asserts these states. It seems to me over the centuries, all these amazing human beings have been looking into the meaning of the universe, you know, have come up with similar findings, similar observations, you know, but they interpret them differently, don't they? So they call them the God realms, a couple of those. Then you got a bit sort of still one of the high suburbs that they call the upper realms. One of the upper suburbs is the human realm. The dudes in the God realms have got like subtle light bodies. Well, we don't have subtle light bodies, that's a fact. But nevertheless, the rebirth that we have got in comparison with the lower realms is definitely a better rebirth. And in fact, it's even better than the gods. Definitely better than the form and formless. They're useless. You just stay in absorption for a few eons and then you go down to the lower realms again. What's the point of that? So because we've got enough suffering to give us a wake-up call, and we have access to intelligence. One of the key factors, one of the key advantages of having a human birth is we've got access to intelligence. I mean, we don't look like we're using it. Check the humans. It's degenerate times, but we've got access to virtue and we've got access to intelligence. But then further down on the lower suburbs, you've got the worst suffering of the animals, the spirits, and the hell beings. And all of these are states of mind. They're states of mind of sentient beings coming along with a certain level of physicality due to our past actions that we are now experiencing. So the whole thing of suffering, then, from the bigger picture point of view, first kind of suffering is the suffering of suffering. And that in the bigger picture point of view refers to the lower realms. Now, there's another way of framing these 3 levels of suffering, and that's in terms of this human life, and that's easier for our minds. So the suffering of suffering, we all know very well. It's when the bad things happen. We know that. Check your life, you know, check our lives. The second something that we don't want comes along, the hurt knee, husband leaving us, how good or bad, however heavy it is, it's the suffering of suffering. It's the suffering of pain. We get this one. Now, when it comes to compassion, that's the only suffering we posit. We have a look. The only people we have compassion for are the innocent victims, and there aren't many of them, and it's usually a few animals and a few children. Think about it. I mean, maybe a couple of women. White men, sorry, forget it. White men are the naughty ones now. It's very hilarious. I mean, I've been an old radical lefty for 45 years and a feminist as well. And I knew 45 years ago there was a group called white men. But the world has always assumed a normal person is a white man and everybody else is a group. Think about this. Women are a secondary. Children, black people, anybody is, if you're not a white man, you're a group. But now people are finally identifying a group called white men. I'm not being personal. I've been one many times. It's okay. It's true, isn't it though? Where did I come from that? Forget about it. Never mind. I was just cracking jokes.
Suffering.
Thank you. Okay, the first kind of suffering, think of your own life, is when the bad things happen. Now, so that's the only level we have, they're the only ones we have compassion for. The poor people, the sick people, the dog that's being kicked, you know, the person who's starving, the ones who are abused, the ones who've been raped, attacked, murdered. They are the ones. But if we discover that person who was attacked before, then I'm sorry, they deserve it. So we don't have compassion for them. So it's very few people that we have compassion for. And I'm being sarcastic, but it's true. So we've got to check these assumptions. This is why it's quite shocking when we start to hear Buddha's view. So the capacity, the level of our compassion is equal to our ability to understand the levels of suffering. So the first kind, easy, good enough. Start with that. Have compassion for the suffering, the poor, the sick. Incredible, no question. But what about the second kind of suffering? And we've got to learn it for ourselves first. And this is a pretty intense one. The third suffering is even more subtle, we can't even get it, you know. But the second kind of suffering, Buddha calls it the suffering of change, which sounds kind of simple. But what he's referring to is okay, the first kind of suffering, the Four Noble Truths. First noble truth, there is suffering. Second noble truth, there are causes. Now, this is really powerful. And I'm going to get back to my first point. If you have a problem and you want to solve it, the obvious first point is to identify the problem, isn't it? If you can't identify the problem accurately, forget it. But the crucial point is, until you have found the cause, you'll never solve it until the cows come home. So the second one is there are causes. So this is what you learn in the high school. You learn in junior school and high school. This is the stuff you do. This is the wisdom wing stuff. You've got to learn what is suffering and its causes. Then you have the solution. Because once you've identified the cause, that implies the solution. This is like a miracle, you know. So as we know very well from the wisdom wing, there are two causes of suffering. And even if we just think of the first kind of suffering, why do bad things happen to me? That's our big question. Well, honey, Buddha says, there are two main causes. And sweetie pie, I'm sorry to tell you, they're both inside you. There are many, many causes. Like if Brian is my mean boyfriend, Buddha doesn't disagree that he plays a role in my suffering. Equally, he doesn't disagree that Brian plays a role in my happiness. But for the Buddha, Brian is a secondary cause. He's a catalyst, in fact. This is very shocking for us. This is the most shocking point because as far as we're concerned, there is one cause of my suffering and indeed one cause of my happiness, and it's called Brian. We all know that, but the Buddha's got more nuanced view. Yes, Brian did punch you. Yes, Brian was kind to you. Buddha doesn't disagree. But honey, he says, they are not the main thing to look at. If you want to find the root of your happiness, you've got to check two things. One, your past action of kindness to the person called Brian 22 lives ago, because karma's personal. And two, the virtue that drove that action. So there's two causes of suffering, the negative karma I did in the past and the delusion that drove that action. So there are two main causes of suffering, karma, delusions. That's it. I mean, Buddha's view is so simple, but it's too easy for us because to go to a neuroscientist and say, please tell me the two causes of suffering in the whole universe, he'll laugh. We would laugh. We do laugh. We don't have no idea yet why, because as we say, because we haven't found the cause. We would even say, oh, well, nobody knows why. We're so arrogant, you know, because we as scientists haven't found the cause yet. Buddha's been very quietly telling us for 2,500 years his views. And sure, Jesus has got his views as well. And so have the Australian Aboriginals. I mean, you listen to the views on the planet. I mean, I can't even understand the Australian Aboriginals' view. It's so subtle, you know, it's so unusual. But they've been around quietly for 40,000 years until white people came along. The white English men, be more precise. Supported, no doubt, by their white wives. Anyway, so for the Buddha, there are two causes of suffering, and these are the ones that we have to, he doesn't argue there aren't external causes, whereas in our world there is only the external, and this is the big shift. This is the part that's painful for our minds. We only focus on the external, and we're good at that. But he says no, the main thing is inside. Past action, because that implies consciousness being not physical. That implies continuity of consciousness coming from past lives, and implies every single millisecond of what we think and do and say. This is the law of karma, stays in our mind, programs our mind, sows seeds in our mind that do not go astray unless you do something with them, and then they will ripen in the future as our experiences. Negative actions ripen as suffering, positive actions ripen as happiness. These are all the nuts and bolts in the wisdom wing that we have to learn for ourselves, because then when we understand these different levels of suffering, even the first one, forget about the more subtle level of suffering, but once we've got it down in the wisdom wing for why I suffer, then I'm going to, because I know it's my past karma and my delusions, now the whole way of seeing the world completely shifts, even just for the first kind of suffering. Suddenly I see the guy kick a dog, whereas once I'd only have compassion for the dog and get angry at the guy. Now I'm going to have even more compassion for the guy, because I realize the dog is just finishing their karma and the guy is just beginning his future suffering karma. So it's a very different view, completely changes the whole way you see the world. And that's just the first kind of suffering. Whereas the view we have is nobody knows why, but this mean, ugly guy is angry. How dare he kick an innocent dog? So we have compassion for the dog, but to that next second, we have that equal amount of anger towards the person who did it. That's the way we think of compassion in our world. Buddhism is completely different, and you cannot know that until you've done the wisdom wing, and you can't do it until you've done it for yourself. In fact, they don't say you can't have compassion for others and have compassion for yourself. They don't say it that way, but we can say it that way. We get that. That makes sense to us. So hearing about karma and delusions brings for us normally guilt, and you mean I'm the blame, and we get even more angry with ourselves. No, you're not the, yes, you are, but you should have compassion for yourself. That comes in the wisdom wing. And this that informs our ability to even have compassion at the first level of suffering, when the bad things happen. So now if we look at these two causes back in the wisdom wing, and we learn this in the Four Noble Truths, the two causes of the past action, karma, and we learn all about that in junior school. We control our body, our speech, and we control our body and speech. Then we get to high school, the second scope, and now we get to the nitty-gritty of being a Buddhist. This is where we begin to really be a Buddhist. As Lama Yeshe puts it, we become our own therapist. We learn about the mind. We learn about the delusions. We distinguish between delusions and virtue. We learn the Buddhist model of the mind. And without understanding this, you cannot understand properly the compassion wing. So the root of the problem is effectively the main cause of our suffering in the mind is called attachment. The root cause, of course, is ego grasping, the root delusion. There are three poisons, these three poisons, as Buddha calls them, the three toxic emotions. They always talk about 84,000 delusions, and Buddha has 84,000 solutions. And I keep asking the Geshes, which text can I find that map of the mind? They never know. They never say, well, you won't find it, they say. But they keep insisting this Buddha's got 84,000 delusions. And in fact, young Ling Rinpoche, have you invited him to teach you people in Texas? Have you ever thought to invite him? Well, it's about time. You know Ling Rinpoche, right? You know who I'm talking about. Do you know who I'm talking about? He's the root guru of His Holiness the Dalai Lama. He's a reincarnation. He's 35 or something. And he's a Drepung. He's a Drepung man. He's the same as your guru. Come on, you people. About time you invited him, please. He comes to the West when they start traveling again. He's amazing. He's wonderful. Anyway, Ling Rinpoche always said, and I hadn't heard this before, people also told me they hadn't heard this before. Whenever he talk about the young Ling Rinpoche, all the 84,000, he says the three poisons, there's ignorance, the root delusion, the view of clinging to the self-existent me, which gives rise to attachment, this bottomless pit of emotional hunger, this neurotic, dissatisfied, miserable attachment that gives rise to attachment, which then gives rise to aversion or anger when the attachment doesn't get what it wants. There's this hierarchical relationship between these three. These are the three poisons. So then all these 84,000 subsumed to these three. So as Lingam Rinpoche said, 21,000 of all the delusions are rooted in ignorance. 21,000 are rooted in attachment. 21,000 are rooted in aversion. And the other 21,000 are rooted in all three. So there is a map out there somewhere, you know, of all these neurotic states of mind. But they're marvelous. These three are, by understanding these three, which sounds so cute to us. If you go to your therapist, oh, I've got a bit of anger today. Well, shut up and go home, Robina. Wait till you want to kill Brian, you know. We don't want to, it just seems too boring. But these three are profound when we start to understand them. And that's high school, people, the wisdom wing. So effectively, in the Four Noble Truths, Buddha's telling us that even though ego grasping is the root delusion, effectively, the main cause of suffering in our daily lives is attachment. So that means if we don't understand attachment, I'm telling you, you don't understand Buddhism. It's very simple. You just don't. And if you don't identify it here, then you can't be a Buddhist. How can you be? But we have all our cliched own views of it, you know. And this is why in the high school model on the wisdom, when we have to understand the Buddhist model, at least the bare minimum in learning to distinguish between the delusions and the virtues. And this is implied by the word Buddha. Think of that word, people. If you can rid the mind of all the delusions and develop to perfection all the goodness, it's obvious that Buddha makes a distinction between these two sets of states of mind. This is the key job of being a Buddhist. And this is in high school. You learn it in high school. You become your own therapist, Lama Yeshe put it. So attachment. So we have to understand attachment. So if we understand attachment is effectively the main cause of suffering, then we can begin to understand these different levels of suffering. So you could argue that the suffering of suffering is when attachment doesn't get what it wants, or when it gets what it doesn't want. And what's that? That's when the bad things happen. So you want chocolate cake, but you get carrot cake. You get upset. That's because of attachment to chocolate cake. And you assume you're going to get what you want, and you have a panic attack when you don't get what you want. That's called the suffering of suffering, the simplest level. Now, the suffering of change, this is very, very depressing, is when attachment does get what it wants. And you know what we call it? We call it happiness. This is the tricky part. So this seems really cruel of Buddha. You mean I'm not even allowed to enjoy my bloody chocolate cake? Because so to begin to understand the suffering of change is really crucial. You know, then we can start to expand our compassion. And then that, what does that mean? Suffering of change is simply, you know, how are we going for time? 11, quarter to. Okay, I'll say these words now. I'm just giving background to everything. Then I want you to ask me some questions, okay? So, no, I think I'll stop there, and I want you to ask me some questions, if there are any. I've said a lot of things, and of course, I assume I'm still talking fast. I mean, I thought when I get old, I'd stop talking fast, but apparently I haven't. So are there any questions? If not, I'll carry on. Don't worry. No. Yes, Lee. Talk to me, darling. Yes.
What was the name of the Rinpoche that you referenced earlier?
Ling.
Okay.
You look him up. He's the reincarnation of the root guru of the Dalai Lama. He passed away in about 1982, and the young one, he's one of the highest. He's sort of, in terms of hierarchy, he's one of the highest lamas around, and he's from Drepung, which is the same big monastery as your lama in your group. He's Drepung Lama, and he's about 35, 38 now, and he's already around. Beautiful English, goes around teaching. He had a very serious car accident many years ago. I think he lives in pain all the time. He can't sit cross-legged. He's a wonderful Lama, marvelous Lama. Such a joy to have him. He's a young man. He's so beautiful. Ling, L-I-N-G.
Lee, Brian pasted a link to info about him in the chat.
Wonderful.
Oh, thank you.
He's good. Yeah. Any other questions, people? To clarify some points, or should I just keep going? Huh? Shall I keep going then?
I don't see any questions.
Okay, if you just stick your hand, make one of those signs on your picture, and I'll see your hand. Then I can stop so I'll keep chatting until you stop me. Okay. So what we're looking at here, contexts, the summary. We're looking at compassion. Compassion is which culminates in bodhicitta. Compassion is seeing suffering and wishing it didn't happen. I was going to go great compassion. I'll come back to that. Great compassion is the unique characteristic. I'll describe that in a minute. But even before we have compassion, which is empathy with suffering, we have to know, oh, what's suffering, please? What's the definition? So then we've got to go back to high school and learn the Four Noble Truths, which we would have done already in the wisdom wing, and know what is suffering. So there are three kinds of suffering. The suffering of suffering is when the bad things happen. Now, the suffering of change, the second one, it's effectively what we call happiness. So what does it mean? What's it got to do with attachment? Because attachment is the reference point here. Attachment runs the show, you see. Attachment is bottomless pit, this primordial dissatisfaction. And dissatisfaction is no matter what you get, it's never enough. And that's the result from past lives of practicing attachment. Because attachment's this bottomless pit. Attachment is a lie in the mind that believes that when I get that, I'll get happy. But in fact, you don't get happy. All you do is you get more suffering. And my mother used to say about food, I'd think about it, you know, because I was always attached to food. Still am attached to food. Don't care about boys, possessions, just, you know, food, or what, I mean, what does a nun have, you know? A nun has shoes. Once somebody cracked joke about how I was attached to my shoes. A nun, it's like the Arab ladies. We got shoes, they got jewelry. We got shoes and food. I think it's about it nuns can have, you know? Because what's it, this thing, my 14th century pair of robes. Anyway, I'm raving on. So attachment is this bottomless pit that no matter what we get, we'll always think it's not enough and we'll always want more. So it's just this endless, as my mother used to say, it's so simple. The more you get, the more you want. It's profound. Our mother knows it. Our mothers know. That's what Buddha's saying. So because of attachment, effectively the main cause of suffering in the daily life for the Four Noble Truths, it's the driving force underneath everything else. It's so subtle. It's so primordial, we don't notice it, only when it's gross in our culture. We only notice attachment when you're a junkie, when you're an alcoholic, when you want to jump on 14 boys every day. Then we consider you got a problem. You're called an addict. Well, addiction is just a strong word for attachment. Buddha says we're all junkies, we're all addicts. It's a question of degree and a question of the object. And I'm not being sarcastic. It's a very precise definition for the Buddha, you know. So attachment then is this constant emotional hunger that is always looking for something, and it's always out there, of course. It's the obvious level. And then what attachment does, it exaggerates the deliciousness of the boy. It exaggerates the deliciousness of the handbag, of the food, or whatever it is, and then causes you to totally believe that when you have contact with it, happiness, satisfaction will come. So now, Buddha, we can go on for the next 6 weeks on this. I'll just keep it simple. So the more we look into this, the more we're going to see it's a lie. It's a misconception deep in our bones. And we can prove it, we can disprove it quite quickly. Buddha's not arguing that when you meet the cake and the mouth meets the cake, he's not arguing that some pleasure is not triggered. He agrees there is some happiness. Word pleasure, joy, happiness, they all mean the same thing. Definitely he agrees. But he says we're not noticing in a more refined way the process. So what happens is we believe chocolate cake, we've got a general view that chocolate cake makes me happy. But we know very well, don't we, that as you keep eating it, at some point, the pleasure starts to decrease and displeasure, unhappiness starts to grow until eventually after the fourth piece, you now have you've changed back to the suffering of suffering and you want to vomit. So the suffering of change simply means the pleasure doesn't last. Now, we know that, but it seems rather cruel of Buddha to point it out. The simple fact is because we don't have any, we don't know of any happiness that doesn't change if we analyze it. We all know that any moment of pleasure we have, some of it lasts long, but eventually it ends. We know that when it's very distressing because we desperately want it to last. So this is the suffering of change. It's what we call happiness. So when you look at now and you start to understand this, you look at other sentient beings and you add a whole pile more to your objects of compassion. You now include all the rich people, all the happy people, all the smiling people, the people who are what we call happy because their attachment's getting what it wants. The ones who don't have it, who have attachment that doesn't get what it wants, they're the ones who are miserable, the ones who are being abused and raped and tortured and harmed and are poor and sick. Their attachment's not getting what it wants, so there's this unbearable pain. Those who are getting what attachment wants, they're the group called the happy people, the rich people. We would think, what the hell am I having compassion for them for? because they're the junkies. So you've got two junkies, okay? You've got one junkie who can't get the junk, so they're living in torture and nightmare. That's the suffering of suffering. You've got the other junkie who just got a dose of junk and has just had their fix, and they're looking like they're blissful. That's the suffering of change, because we know they're going to go into the next group, the earlier group very soon. That we understand. Well, that's the suffering of happiness. That's the suffering of change. So then you're going to have compassion for the ones who are happy because they think they've found happiness. They have, but it will not last. That's the whole point the Buddha's making. It sounds mean of him to point it out to us. I mean, can't we just accept that it'll change, Buddha, and be happy with what we've got? He says, no, guess what, honeys? I have found a method to get happiness, joy, bliss, ecstasy, rapture, you name it. These all are synonyms for levels of happiness. I have found methods to get happiness that don't rely upon attachment, that don't rely upon external objects, and that won't change into the suffering of suffering. Technically, that's what Buddha's saying. So this is all the wisdom wing, people. When we get this for ourselves, we're going to have compassion for ourselves. And we're going, oh my God, we are all in the same boat. Now, for what it's worth, the third kind of suffering, Lama Zopa calls it compounding, pervasive compounding suffering, or all conditioned suffering, or all pervasive suffering, whatever it is. But all it is this. So we take even attachment. Well, really, it's more to do with ego grasping, but take attachment as our reference point. The first kind of suffering is not being able. Is not being able to get the junk. So you're living in a nightmare. You can't get what attachment wants. It's just there. It's very shocking. The second kind of suffering is when you get the junk. The third kind of suffering is being born as a junkie with a body of a junkie, which means a body of the five senses, and to in a world that's constructed of heroin. And in order to exist in that world, the body of the five senses, driven by attachment, you must ingest the five sense objects. That's all pervasive suffering. So the solution to the first kind of suffering, go to junior school, abide by the laws of karma, and give up harming others. The solution to the second kind of suffering, give up attachment. The solution to the third kind of suffering, realize emptiness. It's all there in Buddha's teachings, you know, his methods, how to stop suffering and its causes. This is the wisdom wing. This is the basis of your ability to now go, oh my God, we are all in the same boat. And when you get this level of understanding of the three levels of suffering and have renunciation of this suffering and its causes, that's the first level of realization. Renunciation sounds so forbidding, but what are you giving up? You're giving up suffering and its causes because you're up to here with it. Now this is the basis of your ability to have compassion for everybody. Every wacko, every Mr. Trump, every psychopath. There's a Greek word. Every schizophrenic, a Greek word. Every bulimic, a Greek word. Look, all these Greek words. So hilarious. You'll have compassion for every single sentient being without exception. But you cannot have that until you got it for yourself. That's the wisdom wing. Of course, you can't get it all at once. You grow it gradually. This is the reference point for understanding the compassion wing. So the level, in other words, the levels of compassion that the Buddha talks about are insane. I mean, when I start to read all these things, I can't handle it. It's like too much, you know. When I hear Lama Zopa Rinpoche, he's my teacher, the teacher of our organization. You hear, you know, in my case, all these great holy beings are the same. He never stops talking about compassion. And it's sort of obvious. I mean, he can go on for hours about it, you know. It's obvious that's where he's at. And he talks about the unbearable compassion, you know, unbearable compassion for every single sentient being. They say Lama Zopa doesn't sleep. He says all the lamas show different aspects, you know. And Roger, his attendant, says for Lama Zopa, sleep is a disgusting waste of time. Because it means you're like your children are dying and you are snoring, you know. How could you do that? So, of course, we're not capable of that right now. All we can do is aspire, isn't it? That's why it's so moving to read these stories of the great yogis and the great bodhisattvas. It's like when I was a Catholic, I loved reading about all the saints. It gives you courage, you know, wow, I can become like that too. It's really important to do that, because you can hear all these words in the books, but as soon as you see a person who embodies it, that's why the Dalai Lama is so moving for this world, you know. I mean, he doesn't show the aspect of being like Lama Zopa. He sleeps. He goes to bed at 8 o'clock. He shows the aspect of being a proper little monk, you know, because that's what the world needs. He talks very simply. He talks very down to earth, but millions of people on this planet are moved by him. I remember one woman in England years ago, she had a Tibetan Buddhist husband. She was so complicated to her, didn't understand Tibetan Buddhism. And she'd been to the Royal Albert Hall to a big talk by the Dalai Lama, and she was in tears. I said, she didn't want to, she said, what's enlightenment? I don't know. I said, do you like Dalai Lama? Do you want to be like him? I said, well, that's enlightenment. Good enough, you know. And that's the impact we can see that he has on the world. I remember over the years, back in the 80s, early 80s, when our organization invited His Holiness with other organizations to this big tour of Europe he did, probably back his second or third visit of Europe, you know. Not many people knew him that time. And Lama Yeshe so kindly appointed 10 of us Westerners as security guards for His Holiness. I thought I'd won the lottery. I couldn't believe it, you know. And Lama being very radical and wonderful, and he had 5 boys and 5 girls, and the boys were all Swiss. It was hilarious. And they wore nice grey slacks, maroon ties, white shirts, and navy blue, proper looking gentlemen. In other words, all these bunch of hippies. He made them cut their hair and dress up like gentlemen. And we ladies, the 5 of us, we had to wear these like Americans call plaid, we call tartan, plaid skirts, green, a yellow blouse, and a little maroon jacket. And there were 3 of us nuns, but Lama Yeshe made us wear lay clothes, so I had to have hair, you know. So I remember we traveled about 6 weeks with His Holiness. It was an incredible experience. In Italy and Spain and France, we went on the aeroplane with him. We stood at the teachers looking very serious, looking for terrorists, you know. It was very hilarious. And but just watching him up close was amazing. Anyway, Lama Yeshe, every time he saw me in my lay clothes, when I first went to Milan, we had to first go to Italy. I remember my friend Susanna took me shopping. I bought these nice knee-length maroon boots, and I wore lipstick. I thought I should look like a proper lady. I had hair and wore lipstick, you know. Thought I should look nice. And Lama Yeshe would look at me and say, "Oh, I think I like you better like that." He would laugh at me, you know. And one of my lamas, Geshe Rabten, one of the old past lamas, he looked at me very sternly. "Are you still a nun?" "Yes, Geshe Lama." And later, 7 years later, we had a big meeting with His Holiness in Dharamsala, some of our directors, and I was there. Because, we spent 6 weeks with His Holiness, and I was wearing lay clothes, and we'd look at him, and we'd take him here, we'd go on the airplane, we'd guard his hotel room, you know, all these things. We'd see him, and I'm going to tell some more stories. But then I know 7 years later, we had this meeting. He looked at me at the end, and he said, "When did you become a nun?" And I knew what he meant. And I said, "Oh, I was a nun then, Your Holiness." And he gave me a big hug. He said, "Oh, my security guard," he said. That's my Dalai Lama story. But what I noticed, what I'm getting at is just being up close in the different cities, in Barcelona and various cities in Italy, the Italian, the Spanish, he loves the Catholic monks, you know, the Catholic meditators. And in Spain, he was invited to these different monasteries, these Carthusians, these amazing Catholics who meditate and pray day and night. So he had a meeting with them, and we girls weren't allowed in. Okay, that's their rules. I can't help it. But we stayed outside, and when they came out, we saw His Holiness, Lama Yeshe, the boy guards, they were in, and these Spanish meditators, they were in bliss, you know. And the Italian boy, the guards told us, the 5 male guards, my group, that His Holiness and the monks had this incredible conversation about the absolute, about ultimate reality. They were in bliss. They were so happy. He just made them so happy, you know. Everywhere people went, I could see this. I remember one time, I'll never forget, in Barcelona, it was in 82, you know, he wasn't well known. And this group, on these massive groups, 5,000 people would turn up in these public talks. But I remember these Spanish ladies, you know, these very traditional European ladies with their handbags and their high heels and their stockings and their gloves, coming to these teachings, kind of looking hungrily for something, you know, touched and moved by His Holiness, people in tears so often. The mayor of Rome was in tears, you know. It was so fascinating to watch this. I remember in our center in Italy, where His Holiness taught Gyawa Gyatso, which is a tantric aspect of Chen, highest yoga tantric aspect of Chen Rezig. And we had like 700 people in a big marquee, you know. And then it was so wonderful that we would bring the guards, and at our center, Istituto Lama Tsongkhapa, near Pisa. And the Italians, always, all the cities would always provide police escorts and things, you know. So the Pisa cops sent these young terrorist squad cops, you know, with their machine guns over their shoulders. And they were so arrogant initially, seeing this weird looking dude in this pink skirt, you know. I mean, they had their own guys, the Catholics, in their pink skirts, but they were ones he was used to. But after 10 days, Dalai Lama would just pass them by, whack them on the shoulder, smile at them. And by the end of the 10 days, he had them in the palm of his hand. They adored him. And I could see this everywhere he went. He didn't have to do much. He was funny and down to earth and cracked jokes, you know. In Australia, the same. In 96, the FPMT invited him with the main inviter. For like 3 months he stayed in the whole country. The effect was incredible. I mean, 25,000 people came to public talks. They used the tennis centre in Melbourne for a public talk. One small city, always like this, just outside Melbourne, the whole city had a holiday for the Dalai Lama. All the school kids would go to the talks. There's some karmic connection with Tibetan Buddhism in Australia. It's very fascinating. The whole country knew that he was in the country. And we did a special issue of Mandala magazine when I was editing it afterwards. And I interviewed like 50 different people who'd been involved, the police, the media, you know, and I've just got 50-word little summary. The effect that he had on people just by being ordinary. He didn't do anything special. He wasn't kind of holy-woly and looking serious. He was funny, he cracked jokes. It was just amazing to watch, you know, the effect that he had on people. Now, that's the manifestation of compassion. If it's not, what the hell is it, you know? It's like very fascinating to watch it. And his words were so powerful. He's incredible. He had the power of speech. They talk about the speech, you know, we'll talk about this. Power of speech is the Buddha's main gift. We're not subtle enough to access the Buddha's mind. So we need them to speak words out their mouths, you know. So the power of speech is so that whatever that Buddha says, and this is the thing, even when you've got the power of speech, even before you're a Buddha, like the Dalai Lama, you subdue people's minds, you know. People's emotional suffering is calmed. Even just saying hello to somebody, we know can benefit people. The power of speech is so incredible. It's the greatest gift of the Buddha. And it's a gift we can give people. Definitely His Holiness had that, you know. So it's observing. And so this is like reading the yogi's stories, just to see an example. So if he's like that, I think I'd like to do his method. So I better look at the techniques, you know. So that's, you know, it's a very powerful logic, isn't it? You know, I'm chatting away here. With half an hour left. Are there any questions, please? Come on. Ask me some more questions, you people. Ask me some questions. Any old question. I don't care. Come on. Anything. Make up a question. Start the ball rolling. While I have a mouth of water.
Okay.
Yes, Cliff, talk to me.
I've heard reference to relative or a distinction between relative and absolute bodhicitta.
Yes, right, exactly.
Could you address that? It's
Yes,
not clear in my mind.
No, I know it's an odd kind of way they phrase things. It's not complicated. Conventional bodhicitta is what we're talking about, what we're trying to develop, this aspiration to be a benefit to others. And ultimate bodhicitta, they use that term to refer to the realization of emptiness. That's all.
Okay.
It's a particular context they use it. It's referring to emptiness, the ultimate one.
Okay.
They call
Thank
it
you.
that for whatever reason, you know. Yes, Cliff, thanks. What else, people? Any old question? I mean, you don't have to, but you can. Anything. Well, I drink some more water. Come
Okay, here's the question.
on. Good.
Where are you staying in Santa Fe for all these months?
Oh, goodness me. Come on. So now what happened? Yeah, I know what happened. What happened? I've been on the road the last 10 years, just flying on airplanes and then sleeping around, like you know, very comfortably sleeping around. I didn't mind. And then in December, when I was in Kathmandu, which is I always worry about, buy my round the world ticket. The last 10 years, I get these round the world tickets. Maybe some of you know them. All the airline organizations do it. So I'm with One World, which is Qantas, you know, Qatar Airways, American Airlines, British Airways, a whole bunch of them. So they have these things called round the world tickets, which make it very cheap. You start and end in the one place and you go in one direction. It's got 16 sectors. So they're really cheap. So I'll get one of those with Qatar Airways, starting in Kathmandu, and I'd buy my whole year's travel using my credit cards, and then the centers, my bookkeeper would then bill the centers to pay back the costs. So I'd get my whole ticket, and then I'd just start traveling and go, and then I'd buy a bunch of tickets in each continent. I was used to have about 50 every year, 60 maybe flights. Anyway, December 2019, after I taught the November course in Copan, I had all my ticket ready for the next year. So always I would do, first of all, I'd be 3 months in Asia. Then December, I'd go after December, January, 3 months in Europe, 3 months in America, 3 months in South America as well, and then across the Pacific to Australia, and then back to Asia every year. Same thing, 10 years. So I had my entire ticket for 2019 all bought. And then I was in Europe finishing my European tour, and then March comes along, and guess what happens? The pandemic happens. And I figured, well, I just have to keep traveling until I decided I was going to keep flying until I couldn't fly any further. So I remember just managing to, it's like Singapore. It was like Saigon, all trying to get on the airplanes to get the hell out. So I scrambled. I managed to get a flight on American Airlines to leave England to get to America. March. So I was in Portland. It was my first stop. I did all my teachings around, and I didn't. I stayed in Portland. There's no travel. So then I couldn't keep staying there because my friend Kate had moved out of her own home. It was too much. So then Charmaine, who runs our center here in New Mexico, took to Norbuling. She kept saying, well, you want to come here, come here. So I figured, okay, I'll come here. Well, that was June last year. I've been here since June last year. So I kept staying in Charmaine's house, but she could get rent for this ridiculous house. She lived with a boyfriend. She refused to charge me. So I figured I have to move out. And there was no sign of me traveling anywhere with this new virus coming again, and impossible to go to Australia, impossible to fly anywhere. Can't go to, India, anywhere. So I figured, well, what am I going to do? So I found a place I signed a 3-year lease on a little spot in the middle of Santa Fe. Here I am here now, in my little house. And I've never done this in my whole 76 years. I've never had a key to a place. I mean, once when I was 23, when I went to England, I had a bed sit in Swiss Cottage in London for £5 a week. I think I bought a few pots, but I've never done it since. I've been living in hippie communes, Catholic communes, communist communes, and Buddhist communes all my life. So I had to start ordering. So I bought 90 items from Wayfair. I this room, it's 230 square feet. Got lovely windows on one side and dead in the middle of the city. It's one of the oldest buildings in town with thick adobe walls. And it's across the road from the cathedral, which Francis of Assisi, which was built on the site of the first church in 1650, that all the locals got fed up and killed all the Spaniards and burnt the church down. But they came back after 12 years, of course, as we know. So it's across the road from the cathedral. I've got a window on the east side. It's just one room, and I turned it into a home. It's like but I read recently about this Milarepa who lived on nothing and lived on air practically. And then there's Galwa and Sapa, according to Lama Zopa, he ate very nice food. So I figured he had a very nice cave. So mine is more like Galwa and Sapa's cave, not Milarepa's. So I bought 90 things. Every single thing I've never possessed in my whole life. I bought spoons, forks, dishes, a sink. I got portable water, cupboards, lights, carpets, chairs, every item. In 1 month, I did it. And all my friends said, oh, Robina, you've got good taste. People didn't know before I had good taste because I just wore the same clothes for the last 45 years, you see. So anyway, that's a long story to answer your question. So I'm in Santa Fe, settled in Santa Fe, which doesn't mean I won't die tomorrow. And it doesn't mean I won't travel. But here I am.
Well, you're tantalizingly close. You're just a mere 11-hour drive.
Oh, that's all it is. Well, you should come. I'll come one day for a weekend.
Right.
Yeah. Folks who are listening, I'm sending a link right now in the chat about Venerable Robina, these teachings, and it also includes, if you'd like to help her buy some more spoons.
I don't need anything. I got everything I need.
Okay, well, the Bodhichitta Trust is always a good cause.
Okay, my Bodhichitta Trust is different. Yeah, everything I get, my donations go to my Bodhichitta Trust, which supports about 20 different people and projects. We're getting a website soon to tell you about it. Yeah, no, the thing is, everything in the house is very interesting discipline. When I traveled, I had one bag, as you know, one carry-on bag. I have one set of robes. And I got this discipline that if even after a week in one place, I'd have extra things like paper clips or cards or something. So I had a discipline. Keep it if it meant I had to use it, throw it out or give it away. Well, it's still the same. Everything in this house I use. There's not one single thing in this house I don't use, and there's not a single thing in this house. Yeah, then if I didn't use it, I'd throw it out or give it away. It's the same thing. Okay, it's got many things in it, but if you're going to have a house, you might as well have a nice house. And it's just one room, but I love it. I sleep on the sofa, and everything is geared to me, my size. I'm 5 feet tall, so I've got chairs. This chairs I'm sitting on. I've got low seats for 30. And usually my legs dangle on chairs, so I have to buy low chairs. I've got a sofa which I sleep on. It's 63 inches on the inside, and I'm 60 inches. It's perfect for me. Everything's perfect. Everything's right the right shape and size. Anyways,
Right.
Yahweh and Sapa's cave, not middle rapers.
Thank you for that.
I
insight.
have,
Raving on. Any questions, you people?
I have a question. Can you
Good.
hear me?
I can, sweetie pie.
Okay. When we were discussing, or you were discussing attachment and the levels of suffering,
Yes.
can you simultaneously, that this is only one part of the question, but simultaneously you are shifting through the two levels of suffering, one being the pain and one being, sorry, I started to get nervous.
Yeah, when the good things happen. So when the bad things happen is the suffering of
Can
suffering,
you-
and when the good things
Yeah.
happen is the suffering of change. Yes, exactly.
Suffering of change. So so when you have an opportunity in life where you are actually suffering in both realms at the same time, that's an opportunity to really grow from that and
Absolutely.
start
Yes.
to release those attachments.
Absolutely. This is the point. This is exactly the point. This is exactly the point. I mean, you're so clear in what you just said. Yes. So we have got both. I mean, in one, I'm just joking now about my lovely house. So I can say my attachment is getting what it wants. I've got a nice couch and a nice this and a nice carpet. So my attachment is getting what it wants. But at the same time, when when things happen, you get a knee ache or you wake up with a headache or you fall over like I did last month and broke my foot, you've got the suffering of pain as well. So they're both opportunities. And the key is we need to recognize them. So when you've got the suffering of pain, and we haven't discussed this at all because it's not meant to be the topic, that's the fruit of past negative karma. So the attitude is to be delighted that you just finished that karma. This is a really powerful attitude. It's a bit like when you go to the gym, you come home with pain. You don't think that pain is bad. You think it's good because you're cleaning up your act. That's the first way to think about suffering of suffering. It's a very powerful one. And then the suffering of change, you have the nice things, but you don't hang on to them. You don't cling to them. You don't have attachment because they're going to disappear. It's going to change into something else. So you learn from it. You recognize it's the fruit of your virtue, but then you don't cling to it so you can relax and allow it to change. Does that make sense?
Oh, that is brilliant. Yes,
Yes.
it makes perfect sense.
Yes, wonderful. This is the essence of
It makes
practice at
perfect
each
sense.
different level. Yes, exactly. That's a perfect question. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Good. Thank you, my dear. Anybody else? That was so perfect. That's exactly the point, Yes, Christopher or Kavita.
This actually, Lee, do you want to ask this or do you want me to read your chat about if sleep is a waste of time?
Who's asking that?
Lee.
So,
Lee? Oh, Lee,
So
there
I-
you go. Talk to me, darling.
so I just was interested in your comment about sleeping, and if sleep is a waste of time, do you have any recommendations for what
Okay,
we can
this is
do
a-
to
This is the
practice
point,
during
truly,
sleep?
exactly. But the point here that I'm making is, we're not capable. We're not absolutely not capable of it, are we? Because it's an advanced level. It's an advanced level of practice. Because the assumption is that Rinpoche's got so much renunciation. He's completely done the wisdom wing. He's absolutely gotten rid of ego grasping. He's got no attachment, no aversion. We have to assume this. And he's got this gigantic levels of unbelievable compassion to the point where so there's two things. One is the greatest yogis, they're all tantric practitioners. These lamas are all tantric practitioners because tantra is just the absolute basis of all these practices. It's the highest level. So because of their power as meditators, they literally don't need sleep. So even though His Holiness shows the aspect of going to bed every night at 8 p.m. and getting up at 3, he's not actually sleeping, Lee. He doesn't need sleep because his mind is totally controlled and totally in the nature of bliss. But he shows the aspect of sleeping as being an ordinary person. So these great yogis don't need sleep, but that's because for Lama Zopa, he shows the aspect, because whatever reason that's good for his students to see this. But the real thing that drives these great meditators is their compassion. They've got this ability not to need sleep because their minds are so subtle. They can go to the subtle level of their mind. They don't ever become unconscious. See, even if we had shamatha, even if we had single point of concentration, which is a sutra teaching, even the sleep we would have would be like joyful. Our minds would be so light. So we don't have shamatha, sweetheart. We're not tantric yogis, so we don't have the highest levels. We can't go to the subtle level of mind. But the other thing is that their compassion. That's what it meant when Roger said for Rinpoche, sleep's a disgusting waste of time, because of his enormous compassion. So all we can do is, like, you know, when I miss watching that video, I've been watching that series of videos about Simone Biles, you know, this gymnast. I mean, when you see what she does, okay, whether you want to be a gymnast or not, it's another point. There's no way in the universe I can even lift my foot half an inch when she can throw her body 4 times in a circle, you know? So you got to see that and not go, oh my God, I can't do that. You go, if you're a little girl, I'd love to be like that. Let me follow Simone Biles's methods. Do you understand? So all we can do, Lee, is go, wow, I'd love to be like that one day. So I'm going to keep practicing getting renunciation. I'll keep practicing doing this. And then maybe, like you can do like me, I'm not ready to not have sleep. There's no even point trying, you know? So when I put my head on the pillow joyfully at the end of the day, I always say to myself, may I find sleep disgusting. Do you understand? And I mean that, because everything you think leaves an imprint in your mind. Now, I'm sincere in that, but I know I can't do it yet. It's like putting a seed in for the future. So maybe by next life, I'll wake up with no interest in sleep. You train your mind, Lee. Meanwhile, then you think, I'm going to sleep because I can't do any better. So I can be restful, so I can get up in the morning and be of use to benefit sentient beings. That's the approach to it, darling. Do you understand? Yeah, good. Goodly. So in other words, don't have guilt.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah, you can. Hang on, Brian. Don't have guilt. Don't go, oh, I can't be like Simone Biles. Don't be ridiculous and you give up. No, not like that. Aspire. That's the main one. Yes, Brian.
So I want to make sure I heard you right. A few minutes ago, you said that pain is, if I get this right, pain is a representation of past negative karma.
It's the result of it, not the
result of
it's the
past
result.
negative karma. So
Yes.
are you talking about pain of any kind? Are you talking
Any kind of suffering, any kind of what we call suffering, Brian, which is basically when the bad things happen. If your wife is mean to you, if you break your knee, if the dishes break, if the weather's bad, whatever level of suffering. In other words, this is why I like to use this in reference to attachment. If we can understand the suffering of suffering or pain as when attachment doesn't get what it wants. Attachment's a junkie that only wants everything to be lovely. So the moment your wife is mean to you, the moment your knee hurts, attachment gets upset. So it turns into aversion and anger and upset. So that's the suffering of suffering to whatever degree. And every moment of it is necessarily the fruit of a past negative seed that we planted in our mind from some action similar to that in the past. That's the logic of karma.
So is there, I guess, giving up attachment would help solve that issue. But
Say that first sentence again. I didn't hear you, Brian.
I said, I guess that giving up attachment
Okay, go.
would help solve that suffering of suffering.
See that? Well, you're cutting to the chase here, Brian. The first level is you're actually solving, by giving up attachment, you're solving the suffering of suffering and the suffering of change. The direct antidote to the suffering of suffering is stop harming others. Why we get lied to is because we've lied in the past. Why we hurt ourselves is because of harming others in the past. Why a person doesn't believe our words is because we've done something. Everything that happens to us now is the fruit of a negativity. So the direct antidote to that is the first level of practice, which is live in discipline. Don't kill, don't steal, don't lie, don't this, don't that. That's the level of practice relating to the body and the speech. That's the direct antidote to the suffering of suffering. Then the antidote to the suffering of change is give up attachment. So if you can do that, then you've solved both.
Is there, because I am interested in this from a daily practice standpoint for myself, is there a way to, purify my previous negative karmatic seeds?
Absolutely. That's the practice of the 4 opponent powers, which is, as Lama Zopa says, we're insane not to do it every day. And that's part of the junior school level of practice. And we'll definitely discuss that. We will go into that. Absolutely. So the first level of practice is 1, stop harming others now, and 2, purify the past negative seeds. They're the 2 levels of practice of the very first level. We'll go into these. Thank you, Brian. What else, people?
Venerable Robina?
Yes, Hillary.
Hi, good to see you.
Yes.
I had just 2 quick questions. One, do you know when the center will be open in Santa Fe for open for teachings?
Yes, we're doing renovations right now to our new property, and we're estimating probably in a few months.
Okay.
The
Very
law, assuming the laws allow us, we're moving according to schedule to have the place ready and up and going in a few months' time. That's the best I can say.
Okay, thank
Good.
you. And
Good.
also, what about just on a practical level, being honest with people about, well, so for example, I have a friend, we watched the movie, maybe people have seen it, My Octopus Teacher. It's a documentary.
Yeah, I heard about it.
Yeah, and it's all about this beautiful relationship between this photographer diver and an octopus, and it's just magnificent. And in the movie, the octopus loses his arm, and it's very sad.
Say it again, what?
The octopus loses his arm.
One of his 8 arms.
Yeah, and it's once you've come to know the beauty of this animal, you really feel for it. So I went to dinner with my friend, and she orders 2 octopus arms. And she knows I've been a vegetarian my whole life. She knows this. And I realized that I shouldn't be bothered that she would order octopus arm. I just thought
it's not your business.
It's not my business. I just thought
That's
since
right.
we had both seen the movie that maybe
So
she
what? Since you'd both seen the movie.
yeah, and we were
Yeah.
both, oh, how could you ever
Okay.
how
So then
could
go on. So that's the
Well,
question. Then what's your
so-
question?
So my question is, yeah, okay, none of my business that she orders it. It was a little curious that would be the one thing that she would order right after we saw this movie. But I don't know, is the best practice to just not be bothered and let it roll off, or to
Darling, have you noticed in the world that, forget about animals, but have you noticed how humans harm each other? Have you noticed it?
Absolutely.
People drop bombs and rape and steal and murder and terrorize and cheat and lie and kill and scream and beat. Have you noticed? Have you noticed, Hillary?
Absolutely.
Well then, what's your problem? God Almighty. One person doing something that you don't like. One person eating an octopus leg, and because it touches you. And I'm not being sarcastic, Hillary. The whole universe is full of, the whole universe is full of people. The world is full of men who rape babies, but we only care about the rape baby when it's our baby next door, or our baby who is our own baby. So it's because you were moved by that movie and you're shocked that I'm not being sarcastic, Hillary. The world is full of suffering. So if we understand karma, we know why people do things. We know why, and then we understand attachment, and then for yourself you have renunciation, and then guess what you're going to have for any people? If you see people raping and killing and lying, you're going to know why they do it, and you're going to have compassion. Now, when it comes to helping people stop doing things to harm others, if you know their mind well enough, and you know what to do or say that will actually help them, then honey, you do it. Meanwhile, mind your own business and enjoy your dinner, and love your friend for who she is.
Thank you.
Do you understand, darling?
I do.
Yes, good.
Thank you.
Good. Thank you. Anybody else? It's good to have questions. You see, things come up. It's really important. 5 more minutes, 4 minutes, 6 minutes. We've got questions. Come on. We've got 90 minutes, haven't we? The class is 90 minutes, isn't it? Good, darlings. Any more questions, you people? Come on. To finish.
I do have one more question.
Good, Hillary. Talk to us, darling.
I have a friend who passed away this week. What can I do to help?
What time? When did they pass? How many days ago?
5.
So you did nothing? You've done nothing so far?
I've said mantras thinking of him.
Well, that's marvelous. You can't do more. She's dead. That's perfect. But what you could, if you're really close and you want to spend the money, you could go to one of the monasteries like Copan and ask. No, they're not doing any right now. They're closed down. So best is you can do that. Nothing more you can do than that. That's the best you can do. Say prayers, and there are certain prayers. There's one of Lama Zopa's books, which is amazing. Maybe you can get that, and I'll give you all the advice. It's a handbook, how to face death without fear. Okay. All the practices, marvelous things you can do. You doing mantras, you getting other people to do mantras, or certain prayers you can say. That's the best you can do, hoping that her mind is still in the intermediate state and you can help her then when she leaves to get a human rebirth.
Okay. Thank you.
Wonderful, Hillary. That's perfect. Thank you.
I do have one more question for you.
Good, darling. Talk to me.
Wisdom that we're all trying to gain to help others. That wisdom comes from our personal suffering, from our experience.
Well, I wouldn't quite, you could argue that's one of the results, but that's not quite the only thing. The wisdom wing is learning, the very first level of practice is learning all the nuts and bolts of Buddha's worldview about why suffering happens, why happiness happens, which is the law of karma. Learning the nuts and bolts of this law so that you can stop your own future suffering. That's the direct, explicit level. That's the explicit meaning of the first level of instruction is don't kill, don't steal, don't lie, don't this, don't that. Why not, Buddha? Because, honey child, those actions will sow seeds in your mind that will ripen as your future suffering. This is the grossest level of suffering we're dealing with. So that's the first reason in junior school. Now, from that, you learn now about why other people suffer. So that's wisdom, isn't it? It's wisdom. At least you know now why there is suffering. They say one of the greatest reasons to have so much compassion for sentient beings is we don't realize why we are suffering. We blame all the wrong things. So we just keep increasing our suffering. So the very first level of practice is abide by the laws of karma, understand what the causes of suffering. Then you go to the next level, and you then start to change your mind. You understand attachment and the delusions, and you start to lessen those. And from this, you get this incredible renunciation of suffering and its causes. And that's, first of all, it's for yourself. Then that informing your ability to have compassion for sentient beings. But crucially, it gives you the ability to know how to help them, because you now know why there is suffering. That's getting wisdom. Do you understand?
I do.
Good.
I do.
Good, darling. And then, of course, finally, you realize emptiness. You cut the root of all suffering, and that gives you the ability to know even more as you progress in your own practice. When you do shamatha, you get single-pointed concentration, you get clairvoyance, you can see the past, you can see the future, and you get more and more powerful, more and more wise in your ability to help others, and your compassion grows equally as you go. More and more, because so compassion is to see the suffering, but the wisdom which comes from your own work on your own mind by understanding karma, understanding the mind, understanding in emptiness. This is what informs your ability to know how to help. Do you see?
Yes. Yes,
Good.
I see.
I'm so happy. That's it. We finish on that
So
note.
much.
Thank you, sweetheart.
Thank you.
Okay. We finish on this note. So thank you so much. Yeah, thank you, everybody. Much love and so happy. We just finished with our little kind of aspirations at the end, which our nice Umze will lead. He's obviously learned nicely how to do it. And he's nice. You do it very nicely. Usually people sing it so boring. You've got a nice bounce to yours. It's good.
And unmute yourself, Christopher.
So this is just saying, this is what we're doing here. I'm putting words first. What we're doing is with this hour and a half, you see, the view of karma is that nothing goes astray. Every thought we've had has sown seeds in our mind. We should be so delighted. We just had an hour and a half of gardening. How amazing. So this first prayer, we're making this aspiration. Second Tibetan, but I'll say it. So due to all the virtuous karmic seeds we just planted, may we quickly attain the state of being a Buddha, just like we motivated, so we really can be a benefit to others. And the second little prayer is saying, may this marvelous Bodhichitta grow and grow in the hearts of all.
Venerable Robina, I would love it if you would sing the Gewa Di Nyur Dudag, because I'm not.
Okay, I'll sing these then.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you.
Okay. O Gewa Di Nyur Dudag, Lama Sangye Drub Gyurne. Drawa Chikyang Ma. Oh, it's the wrong tune. How come it's that one? It shouldn't be the wrong tune. The words are all written on the wrong line. Maybe that's what it is. I'm getting confused. Gewadi Nududag Lama Sangi Lam Drubdyune Drowa Chikyang Malu Pa Deyi Sala Gopa Shog. Yeah, the words are on the wrong line. I got confused. That's okay. I'll sing it again. I'll do it again. I'll chant it. Gewadi Nududag Lama Sange Drubgyune Drowa Chikyang Malupa Deyi Sala Gopa Shog Jangchub Semchog Rinpoche Makie Panam Kegyuchig Ke Panyampa Mepayang Gongne Gongdu Pelba Shog. That's it. Thank you, dearest people.
Thank
We're
you.
all alive in 7 days. We'll meet again and we'll carry on, okay?
Wonderful.
Thank you, people. Much love.
Thank you.
Thank you so, so much for having me. Bye, everybody. Never give up. Bye, darlings.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, Venerable Robina. Thank you.
Thank you, Christopher and Kavita.
Oh,
Thank you,
welcome.
Christopher Kovita.
You're so welcome.
Muchas gracias.
All right, so
Adios.
3 monks walk into a bar.
There's no joke after
Who
that.
knows the next line? 3 monks walk into bar. Susie, you must know the next line.
And one asks for a hot dog.
Oh,
yeah,
that's
yeah,
right.
that
That's
one.
right. How does that go? Finish it, Susie.
Make me one with everything.
There you go.
Make me one with everything.
Okay, I better stop the recording before.